we've been spoiled for choice with this ongoing string of insanely good MMA events. Blockbuster shows that have consistently delivered the goods on all fronts. But the UFC's win streak is far from done, and with UFC 287 around the corner, the fans will no doubt be expecting fireworks as the middleweight title is contested. Israel Adesanya, in his own words, has gone from hunted to hunter, and with his record against the great Alex Pereira now standing at 0-3, the pressure will never be greater, as this former champion seeks to recapture what he feels is rightfully his. But before we dive into the main event, we first turn our attention to the co-main, where a pair of reliable welterweight icons will look to single themselves out for a shot at promotional gold.
It's time!
The clock is most certainly ticking on the careers of both Jorge Masvidal and Gilbert Burns as they move further into this veteran stage. But both guys proved themselves to be relevant within the top 10 last time around. Jorge may have lost to the top-ranked Colby Covington, but he wasn't booted out of the elite levels like some may have expected. He even dropped Colby at one point, and apart from his 2 losses to Kamaru Usman, he's only really losing against the very best of the best. Gilbert, on the other hand, went to war with Khamzat Chimaev before, then putting in a very strong effort against Neil Magny. And after watching Leon Edwards put his rivalry with Kamaru Usman to bed over 5 rounds in the UFC 286 main event, it seems as though the division is wide open for a new contender. And while Belal Muhammad certainly has put in his work, it does appear as though the UFC would prefer to move ahead with a bigger name. Colby Covington has that kind of name, and both Masvidal and Burns are right up there as well. These two guys match up quite well for a few reasons. Both are supremely well-rounded, and while Burns will have the advantage on the mat and Jorge on the feet, do not be fooled into thinking this is a conventional striker versus grappler matchup. Jorge Masvidal might be a few years removed from his resurrection in 2019, but the fact that he came up short against the 2 best fighters in the division at the time doesn't mean that his race is truly run. Time is indeed working against him, but a guy with his level of fame and clear pay-per-view potential is never too far away from a title shot. In fact, given his history with Edwards, he might not need anything more than a win over Burns. Gilbert is as reliable a submission threat as they come, but in recent times we've seen him getting a new lease of life as a brawler, an electric attraction who is always in the running for Fight of the Night honors. Jorge enjoys nothing more than a firefight, and his own well-roundedness should be enough to make this one competitive no matter where it takes place. It's hard not to look at this one as a potential end-of-the-road fight for the loser. Not that they're necessarily going to retire or anything, but with a real transition happening at 170 pound right now, the loser will likely be shut out of the title picture. And given how old both men are, it would take a massive effort to get back in there. It's one hell of a co-main event. As far as stylistic matchups go, a bout of real stakes and consequences for both the welterweight division and each fighter's career. Will it be the tried and tested grappling and devastating power of Gilbert Burns that sees him move right into the thick of the action with the title picture, or will Jorge Masvidal have his homecoming party? A performance in front of his Miami crowd that will act as a springboard for the last run at the belt. Well, thankfully, we don't have to wait long to find out. But we know why you're here. Sure, the co-main event is a great fight, but the main attraction will no doubt come in the form of the headlining bout between the reigning champion of the middleweight division, Alex Pereira, and the former longtime king, Israel Adesanya. Whether you want to call this their second fight or their fourth, there's no denying that history is what makes this fight. Few rivalries reach a 4-fight milestone, and none have done so with the undisputed title on the line. And when you consider the fact that these two have been at each other's throats across 2 different sports, it's easy to understand why the interest levels are so high. Alex Pereira, the man known as Poatan, has been living the high life of a champion ever since he managed to score his second finish of Israel last time around. There are questions over his overall suitability to the MMA game, whether he has the tools to stop a powerful wrestler or a crafty grappler, but the matchup with Adesanya suits him well in this regard. The MMA world is now fully in acceptance of his status as perhaps the single most dangerous striker in the sport. A multifaceted threat whose left hook shot is likely the most lethal weapon in the game. But coming into his 4th clash with the last stylebender, you do have to wonder how he will approach things this time around. This rivalry is quite unique, because even now, even with all the damage that Pereira has done to Adesanya, you could make the argument that Izzy has won far more of each fight than Alex has. Round by round, from their first kickboxing bout to their most recent MMA title clash, Adesanya has more often than not been in control. In Fight 1, he lost a narrow decision that could have and maybe should have gone his way. Fight 2 saw him largely in control up until Pereira KO'd him stiff. And in their sole MMA fight, Adesanya was looking excellent up until Poatan found his way back into the fight in his dying moments. How do you prepare for a guy who is finding such consistent success even when you're performing very well? Adesanya is not out of this fight, not at all. And if you wanted to consider him the favorite to win, it wouldn't be a crazy suggestion. Adesanya has proven himself to be more than capable of beating Alex Pereira, but it's a testament of the refined finishing instincts of Poatan that he has been able to carve out the advantages as he has done. And his ability to take advantage of even the slightest of openings unparalleled. So does Israel try to make this another striking affair, confident in his ability to not make the same mistakes that have cost him before? Does he attempt to lean more on his overall MMA skill set, using wrestling wherever possible? A guy like Pereira brings immense physicality to the table, and one does have to wonder how long he will hang around at 185 pounds, win, lose or draw. He's just about as large a 205 fighter as you will ever see in this sport, and if he can in fact find the win over Adesanya, there's every chance that he will fancy his chances against the light heavyweight champion Jamahal Hill. Then all of a sudden, this relative newcomer to the sport might be looking at a place among that exclusive list of double champions. Make no mistake, folks, this is a bout of immense consequence for both guys. Adesanya's redemption story needs a victory over Pereira to truly make it as good as it can be. It's all well and good clearing out the division of top contenders, but when a guy follows you from a foundational sport and then goes 2-0 over you in your new home, yeah, that would not be a good look. This fight isn't about how Pereira would do against Robert Whittaker or Marvin Vettori as a longtime champion of the division. No, all that matters now is the matchup that stands in front of him. And based on his track record, Poatan should be the betting favorite going in. Sometimes a fighter's ability to win doesn't need to make sense in terms of an accurate prediction. Pereira appears to have Adesanya's number, and that makes it very clear that this is the biggest test of Izzy's career to date. Because if he can't find a way to claw himself back into the win column, then the results are very likely to be devastating. And if it does come to that, Adesanya is going to have to take a really hard look at his current standing within the division and the sport as a whole. Pereira vs Adesanya 5 is a very tough sell. And the closer we get to this middleweight title fight, the more this bout begins to truly get an all-or-nothing kind of feel to it. So will Alex Pereira be able to put a definitive stamp on this rivalry by moving to an unassailable 4-0 over his great foe with another win? A win that would validate him beyond any doubt as the middleweight champion of the world? Or will the last stylebender be able to prove that the last fight was little more than a fluke? A solid connection in a fight that turned the tides of what should have been a comfortable effort. You can guarantee that Pereira vs Adesanya 4 is going to give us an answer. Elsewhere on the card, the first major step up in competition for the highly touted Adrian Yanez sees him take on the veteran Rob Font just below the co-main event. Kevin Holland also makes his return to action, following his loss to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, this time stepping in there with the hard-handed Santiago Ponzinibbio. And of course, the youngest fighter to have ever made that walk to the UFC octagon, Raul Rosas Jr., will make his first UFC pay-per-view main card appearance. He tangles with Christian Rodriguez over 3 rounds to kick off the final 5 fights. UFC 287 looks set to be one of the year's most interesting events, and thankfully we're not too far away from its April 8th date in Miami, Florida.